I started with a voicemail from a driver who didn't leave a name. He called at 2:13 a.m., breathless, and he said he didn't want this traced back to his company. The message was short.
It's back on the air, the kid, the numbers. Mile 141 to 146. If you're real about this, you'll know what I mean.
Then he hung up. I didn't know what he meant, not yet, but the phrase stuck, the kid, the numbers. It took 6 more messages, a handful of emails, and a scanned union newsletter before the shape of it came through. It wasn't a legend, and it wasn't one story. It was an ongoing mess on a lonely stretch of road, an odd radio signal that only showed up at night, and only for people who were moving through that valley at highway speed. It announced itself with a child's voice reciting strings of numbers between scraps of old folk songs. It led drivers to a pull-off where a payphone used to stand, and where, according to every map and maintenance log, nothing stood now. The people who answered heard personal details in the static, license plates, addresses, things you don't want a stranger to say out loud, much less a kid you can't see. The first person who'd actually talked to me on record was a man in his 50s who introduced himself as Mac. He laughed a little when I asked if I could use his last name and said,
"Don't. I don't need this stuck to me in dispatch."
He ran refrigerated freight east-west on a schedule that didn't love the daylight. He'd been hearing the signal off and on for 2 months.
You ever run skip on a CB? You'll get weird stuff after midnight. Storms bounce it, sunspots or whatever. I'm not a scientist. But this wasn't skip. It came in clear and sitting on top of everything else like it had the right to be there. Right away with the kid's voice, counting in 2s, then in 5s. And these little songs, like a porch song, old stuff. Shady Grove, Froggy, that kind of thing. But it kept getting chopped with hiss, and when you heard words again, it wasn't the song, it was numbers. And then my plate. He said my plate.
How are you so sure?
Because he said all 7 in the state, and he said it twice. Slow, not like a recording you stumble over. He said it like he was making sure I heard. I turned the squelch down to 0 and pulled to the shoulder at 143. There's a pull-off there. Used to be a little pad with a payphone. I called my wife from that phone 20 years ago when we still carried quarters. It's gone now. They pulled it, but the spot's still there, a little square of old concrete by the trees. And I swear, look, I'm not big on swearing, there was a glow standing on that pad like a booth with no glass, and the voice got louder when I rolled windows down.
He didn't get out. He said he thought about it, and then the voice said his wife's first name, and he put the truck back in gear.
I told myself it was somebody messing around with a little transmitter and a loop. Kids, probably, except for the plate and the name.
Mac gave me times and mile markers. He gave me the exact model of his radio, a Cobra 29LX, stock mic, no amp, factory antenna, and the weather that night. Clear, 58 degrees, light wind spilling down the hill. His notes were cleaner than mine. He sounded like a man who'd had to explain things in order to be believed, and had practiced the order. The second voice belonged to a woman named Inez Alvarado. She ran a pair of old Peterbilts with her brother out of a yard 2 towns away from that valley. She told me she was happy to talk as long as she could do it with the map open.
It's easier when I can point.
She had a careful, all-business cadence, the kind you get when you've had to repeat the same story to a claims adjuster.
It isn't on a normal channel, that's the first thing. You won't get it on 19 unless the rest of it is quiet and you're close. It comes in best if you flip to 160, 165. I know, that's technically VHF, it's not CB, save the lecture. We're not talking rule books out there. People swap decks. There's a blank spot at night, and that's where it sits.
She didn't stop. She eased down to 30 and took the next turn out, and her brother, 3 miles behind, didn't hear a thing. When they compared notes, she realized that if she'd stayed on the gas, she would have hit a patch of spilled gravel that had slid down from a maintenance site after a storm. 3 other trucks hit that same patch in the weeks before and after. None were fatal. All were ugly. The skid marks were still there when she showed me the spot. That's how this works when you try to trace it. The details line up around the edges, mileposts, weather, the ghosts of an old state-issued phone, and the middle refuses to sit still. People don't agree on what the kid says besides numbers and something pointed that proves he knows who you are. He has different accents. English for one driver, Spanish for the next. a clipped Midwestern flatness for a third. The songs change, but they're always old. Barbara Allen, Shady Grove, Railroad Bill, Oh Death. They come in like a household radio held up to a mic across a table, as if someone were trying to make a point and didn't own a direct patch. The static isn't clean, it's crowded. You can hear other conversations under it. A word from a dispatcher, a complaint about coffee. Then the counting returns. Then the kid says the thing that gets you to look away from the road. I pulled the DOT maintenance cards for the valley and found an entry for the removal of the booth. The line item was boring. Remove tel, unit, restore pad. The work order dates match the stories. The pad stood. The booth didn't. I asked for collision data by mile and got 5 PDFs with gray tables and too many footnotes. The rows that mattered lived between mile 141.2 and 145.6. Before August, there were the usual animal hits and 1 jackknife and sleet. After August, there were 3 single-vehicle incidents in clear weather between midnight and 3. No drugs, no blown tires, no speed anomalies on the log DCM. The kind of report you read twice because a cause is supposed to be in there somewhere and it isn't. I called a hobbyist who logs strange signals on a ridge north of the valley. He goes by Tom online. He's retired, a little giddy about anything with a coil, and he keeps ham gear and old scanners in a shack behind his house. He's recorded a lot of distant ball games and static that he calls auroral curtains, and exactly one thing that made him say,
You should hear this.
He recorded it 3 weeks ago with a beat-up receiver and a wire his son threw in a tree. The file landed in my inbox with no comment line besides the date and time. I listened on a laptop with tired speakers. The sound came on in a thin rush, like air under a door, and then steadied. Someone was singing one verse of Black is the color of my true love's hair in a sweet, ordinary voice, slightly sharp on the high note. Then a gap. Then the numbers. They came like hops on stepping stones, a child counting to stay busy. When the voice stopped counting, it spoke a name. I didn't know the man until the next afternoon, when a driver called and asked if I'd heard the crash tape. He told me whose voice was on it, and why the name made people in the area go quiet when it came up. The man was a regular who ran that route whenever his boss needed last-minute coverage. He had a reputation for doing favors. His coworkers said he took on shifts he didn't want because he liked to be useful. Tom had set his recorder to roll from midnight to 4. At 2:19, the voice said the driver's plate. It said the state. The singing moved back in, the radio hissed, and the signal lifted above the noise the way a carrier does when you sweep a dial across it. Then there was the voice you don't want to hear if you're alone at night with your hands on a wheel, a child, calm and a little bored, counting down from 10. There's a particular kind of quiet that comes when you put a recording like that in a room. You don't have to work for it. The room gives it to you. The first listen is the worst. The second listen is just paperwork. The third is when you hear how ordinary the voice is. It isn't pitched low or high. It isn't made to sound uncanny. It doesn't feel like a prank pitched for the back row. It's a matter of fact, 10, 9, 8, with barely a breath between numbers. The counting on that tape made me think of a kid at a window, cheeks on the sill, watching for headlights and trying not to blink. The driver didn't talk on the tape. You can hear other people, far away on their own sets, asking if anyone's copying. You can hear a dispatcher telling a southbound that mile 130 is clear of debris. None of them are talking to the man whose name just filled the audio. The kid gets to 3 and then pauses and says the driver's home street. He says it the way you say something you've worked to memorize. Then the counting picks up again. 2, 1. The last word is a soft, okay. After that, the sound becomes road instead of room. You can hear a wheel hum, hear a lane marker thrum. You can hear someone's engine brake deep and far away. There isn't a crash on the tape. There's a click, and the signal drops below the hash. The wreck happened 2 miles later, around a bend that doesn't look like anything when you drive it in daylight. There's a shallow cut in the wall and a seam where the pavement was patched, and the grade tips just enough to trick you into tapping the brakes if you come in hot. He didn't roll. He swung wide and backed it into the guardrail hard enough to shear posts and rip his trailer door half off. He walked away with a bruised shoulder and an arm he couldn't lift for a week. He hasn't spoken publicly. I know because I asked. He told the officer on scene that his eyes left the road and wouldn't say why. I listened to the tape twice more, and then I called Mac back and asked if he'd been out there since his first call. He said yes, last week, 2 a.m., eastbound. He dialed across the bands and heard nothing for half an hour. Then a breath. Then the little song. He said he would have kept going if the voice hadn't said his middle name. The middle name did it. He pulled into the truck stop on the far side of the valley and bought coffee he didn't want.
It's like someone trying different keys. They jiggle the lock until something shakes loose in your head. It's not just the freak out. I mean, there's that, sure. But it's the way you forget the other noise. Every other thing gets thin. Customers, miles, clocks. You know that pull? When something makes you certain it's about you? That's what it feels like.
Inez told me she'd asked her brother to run the valley ahead of her on his last night run. He'd flipped through channels and come up empty. She thought maybe the signal didn't care about him because it didn't have a way to reach him.
Or it knew it wasn't me. I don't like saying that out loud. Sounds like a kid's story, but it fits.
There are explanations people reach for when they want to keep the world flat. A pirate transmitter hidden in the trees, a stuck mic with somebody's nephew back in the yard. Skip carrying some school project in from far away and dropping it on a valley at just the right angle. The phone pad has rebar in it. Rebar takes a signal and does things to it. Maybe you can make a ghost of a booth if you have enough steel in the ground and your head does the rest. And then there are the explanations you don't type until late, when you've run out of paperwork and the recordings have been put to bed. Maybe you can make people look at what hurts them most by telling them you know their name and their plate and their street. Maybe you can put a small voice in the air that makes drivers who run by feel like kids again, called to a phone by a parent who wants to know where they are. Maybe there's a reason the songs are the kind you grow under, the ones your family plays and sings along to, even when they can't hold a tune. Maybe the counting isn't a threat at all. Maybe it's a promise, or the only tool the voice has to keep somebody with it. If that's all too soft, I get it. The tape doesn't care how I interpret it. The tape counts down either way. I started putting pins on a map, not because pins solve anything, but because seeing the valley laid out helps me shut out other noise. The pins made a cluster that looked like a careless hand had sprinkled salt across a cutting board. They thickened near the pull-off where the phone had been. Two of the newer incidents, including the non-fatal jackknife, fell just outside the cluster on a night when a fog line ghosted off the edge of the lane and tricked a driver into thinking the road widened. The line really did widen there 20 years ago. A little bit of shoulder to get a car off. The state rolled it up when the dirt slid and took it away. That's the sort of thing that lives in muscle memory long after the paint is gone. I called Tom again and asked him what he did with his recorder after he caught the countdown. He said he went out the next night and let it run again. He captured scratch and ball games and a man in Ohio talking about a bad carburetor on a car he loves too much to sell. He didn't catch the kid. He thinks the signal is there every night, but he can't prove it.
I'm not in the beam. There's a shape to it. You have to be moving. You have to be on that stretch.
It isn't just CB and it isn't just the homemade rigs out there. A few drivers say they picked it up on a cheap AM radio stuck between stations. A county worker heard it on the Traveler's Information Band that runs low-power updates about construction and detours. One man swore it came in on his Bluetooth like a phone trying to pair. He was the only one who said that, and he said it once and then told me not to call again. What ties the accounts together, besides the valley and the hour and the old pad in the weeds, is the way the voice chooses a way to touch you. For some, it's the plate. For others, it's a middle name or the way their mother used to shorten it. For Mac, it was his wife's name, spoken like someone reading it off a card he wasn't supposed to see. For Inez, it was her street. For the man in the tape, it was everything. Plate, state, name, street, and that soft okay. By the time he hit the bend, it didn't matter whether the signal was a prank or a phenomenon. It had done its work. It moved his eyes. I don't have a way to fix that. I'd like to say there's a frequency you can block, a setting you can change, a trick with the squelch that turns the world back into boring late-night chatter. You can switch off your radio. People do. The voice finds its way around. The problem isn't the gear, it's the part of us that wants to answer when a child says our name. A week after the tape, Mac ran the valley and didn't hear a thing until he was nearly out of it. He glanced right anyway because habit sticks, and he saw the reflection again. Not bright this time, not like a light left on. A dull rectangle in the brush, the exact size of an object the state used to own. He said he kept his hands at 10 and 2 and talked out loud about weather and fuel economy to keep his brain on the road. The voice came at the end like a breath on glass and said his middle name again. He said he laughed, once like a man who didn't know what else to do. Then Nez took a different route. She added 10 minutes to her run, and a little fuel burn to keep herself away from the pull-off.
I'm not superstitious. I'm just not stupid.
She told me it felt like a game she refused to play, and then admitted she still flips the dial out of habit when the clock goes past 2. I keep the tape on a drive with other things I don't pull up unless I have a reason. There are a few nights a year when I decide I'm allowed to have questions and not answers. This will be one of those. The part that gets me isn't the counting, it's the way the song comes back after the numbers. Always a scrap, always somebody singing in a room with cheap light and a fan somewhere. It makes me think about how a lot of us learned songs from people who didn't know the words, and how that never stopped anybody. It makes me think about a kid in a kitchen who might have been told to sit by a phone and wait. If you run that valley and the radio starts to behave like it has a plan, you don't owe anybody a show of bravery. You can pull into the wide spot by mile 146, kill the set, and let the truck rock in the wind while you look at the ridge lines. The counting can't do anything if you don't bring it inside. That's my working theory anyway. It's the only one that lets me say something useful without pretending I can prove it. The driver on the tape went back to work after the crash. He asked for day runs for a while. His boss gave them to him because he's a decent human being, and it turned out the man was good with customers. He likes bringing people what they're waiting for. Maybe that's the reason he took so many late runs in the first place. There's satisfaction in being the one who shows up. When I asked if he'd heard the voice since, he said no. When I asked if he believed what he heard the first time, he said he believed he didn't make it up. When I asked if he ever used that shoulder again, the one with the old pad, he didn't answer. He didn't have to. There are places you pass through that ask you to leave them alone. I can't tell you how to keep a nighttime signal from getting under your skin. What I can tell you are the names of the songs that show up most often, and the exact model numbers of the radios in the rigs where people heard it. None of that matters if a voice says your plate and your street. What matters then is whether your eyes stay on the lane. And if the counting starts, you can say your own name out loud, just to give your head something else to hold on to. You can name the exits and the districts and the towns on the other side of the ridge. You can think about stubborn things, torque specs, load limits, lug counts, the fact that the booth is gone and the pad is just concrete and weeds and an old memory of a call. The tape ends like this. The numbers stop, the road sound swells, there's a breath you almost miss, and then the singing returns for 3 words before the recorder drops the cut. It's not an ending, it's what happens when a machine doesn't know that one moment matters more than the rest. Machines are good at making your life feel like a stream. This wasn't a stream for the man driving that night. It was a single place where a little voice waited and said okay. After that, it was just a guardrail doing what it was built to do. If you hear the kid, and you decide to tell someone, people will try to make it fit whatever story they like best. Engineers will talk about skip and ducts, believers will talk about lost calls. Skeptics will point at your service records and ask what you ate for dinner. I collect all of it, because that's my job. Then I look down at my notes and highlight the parts that make the hair go cold on my arms. It's never the static. It's the personal details squeezed into the noise. It's the way the voice sounds when it says your name like you've been neighbors all your life. And it's the light you can't photograph on a pad where a phone used to be. People love a good ghost. I don't know that this is one. I think it's a habit in the air. A bad idea that learned how to call you back, a way for an old square of concrete to keep pretending it has a purpose. If you run through there tomorrow night and your speakers breathe and you hear a porch song cut to pieces by numbers, you don't need to be heroic. You can turn the knob and let the world get small and dumb again. You can talk about weather. You can count your own way. 10 lanes of reasons to keep your eyes up. 9 more not to tap the brakes. 8 seconds to the next sign. 7 white posts that say you're still on the road. 6 lines in the mirror, sticking where they should. 5 miles to the exit with the truck stop whose coffee you hate. 4 good tires. 3 straps to check. 2 hands on the wheel. 1 pad in the weeds that doesn't deserve a look. I'll keep listening. I'll keep taking calls. And if I get another file like Tom's, I'll put it in the drawer until I'm having one of those nights when questions are allowed. I'll play it once, and then not again for a while. The tape won't change. The voice will count the same way every time. It's us who move. It's us who decide whether we answer.